Hey everyone, welcome back to another video. In this one, I'm taking a look at Spot. Spot is one of the characters that is new to Marvel Future Fight that they actually did right. Most of the times when they've released a character that is new, they usually don't include the Awakening or T3. They usually just release them at T2 only, which immediately makes the character borderline useless unless they are a support. But even then, they can't really be used in endgame content since the characters need to be upgraded to either an Awakening or a T3. Thankfully, the devs have realized this at least for Spot, since the character is immediately able to be awakened and transcended. Besides that, the character also has a great base kit. Even without a uniform, he does really well in PvE and PvP, considering that he has an iframe ignore, damage accumulation, and even up to 120% additional damage for one skill, which I believe is one of the highest damage procs in the game in a character's kit. In addition to that, the character is also free for a limited time as long as you get the tokens from the event quest, and the devs were really kind this time around since you only really need to get, I believe, 5 tokens or something very low, so it doesn't impact or take away from the end reward that you want to get from those tokens, like a P card, a CTP, or something like that. In my opinion, they did everything right for a new character release this time around, making the character free for a limited time, releasing them with a Transcendence or a T3 so they can be used in endgame content, and making the character's base kit good enough so they can be used in both PvE and PvP even without a uniform. Hopefully, if the devs follow this template for new character releases in the future, then many players can be excited about new character releases instead of just getting that typical T2 that we would get previously and just have the character collect dust and have no use in the game whatsoever. Jumping straight into it, all of the testing that I did for the character was with the CTP of regen, so no damage proc, and I initially started to test the character at T2 on stage 99 of World Boss Ultimate Thanos, just to see how he would do before he got the Awakening. As I mentioned previously, the character's kit is really good, and even without that Awakening, he was able to clear stage 99 of Thanos with 3 minutes left. You can get a better idea of just how good his base kit is since he was almost able to one-shot stage 99 of Proxima, clearing the stage in 30 seconds, even with no damage proc. Once awakened, the character does Thanos 30 seconds faster, basically reaching the upper limit of how quickly this fight can be completed. Similarly, versus Proxima, he clears the stage in 18 seconds and can essentially one-shot it if you use a damage proc. Because the character has an iframe ignore in his kit, I wouldn't necessarily recommend building him for PvE. However, if you do want to build him for PvE, I would probably recommend a CTP of Rage, since you're likely not going to be using him in World Boss Legend stages, and he does have some usability in Alliance Battle Extreme on the speed villain days. That said, the character is proc friendly, so if you really wanted to, you could also use a CTP of Energy. I wouldn't really advise using a Destruction because he already has penetration in his kit, and that would conflict with the one that you get from Destruction. As you can see from the clear time, I was only about 15 seconds short of clearing the fight within 60 seconds, which is pretty ridiculous for a character with no uniform and is one of the fastest clear times that I've had for a stage 9 null test with no damage proc. After adding in a leadership and support, the character was also able to clear stage 39 of null with almost 40 seconds left, and to put into perspective just how good that is, the character is able to clear a stage that a native tier 3 like Gore isn't able to do. I know Gore is more situated for PvP, but that just shows you how good this character is, and on top of that, he is also viable for PvP and actually quite solid there too, as you'll see in the later clips. I wanted to see how far I could push Spot in World Boss Legend, considering that he doesn't have a uniform or a damage proc, and I wasn't able to clear stage 59 of Mephisto. I was about 45 seconds off from clearing the first phase within that 60-second time frame to be able to clear the fight entirely. But if you do use a damage proc, then he is able to clear this stage, which is saying a lot for a character that again has no uniform, and is basically better than some characters that do have a uniform, and even some characters that also have a damage proc. I can't really say whether the character will be meta for the speed villain day in ABX. My guess is that he likely won't be, because he's missing that damage from the uniform, and because his 3 cancel doesn't have too many hits, and ABX is mostly based off the number of hits that the character can do on top of the damage as well. So Red Goblin is still probably going to be the main character for this particular day. Regardless, Spot does have Silence, Paralysis, and Burn for all of the different seasons, and I was able to score close to 9 million without a damage proc. So with a proc, he should be probably close to 10 million, and with a Rage, probably closer to 11 million. He's actually a pretty solid option for a free character for this particular restriction. The rotation for Spot is really simple. You do 3, cancel 4, cancel 5, and then once you get your Awakening unlocked, you do 3, cancel 6, cancel 4, cancel 5. The reason that you go in this order is because the 3rd skill gives you damage accumulation, so you want to open with that. The 4th skill adds a damage layer as well as a damage buff, and the 5th skill has a damage proc, the 120%, for that single skill, so that is the one that you want to end on. Again, you can see just how good Spot's base damage is. He's easily able to clear the first phase of Dormammu almost in 60 seconds flat, which means that he can solo the fight entirely. Besides that, I believe that Spot was one of the fastest, if not the fastest character to clear the first phase of Dormammu without a damage proc compared to my other characters, but also one that doesn't have a uniform either. So by this, I obviously mean the character compared to other level 70s who had a uniform and no damage proc, and Spot was able to clear it faster without a damage proc and also without a uniform. Although Spot is really solid in PvE, with the introduction of level 80s and T4s basically outclassing most of the other characters in that content, PvP is likely where he'll have the most value. Fortunately, the devs gave him a lot to work with. They gave him guaranteed dodge, so he's harder to hit, especially with characters that don't have much ignore dodge in their kit. And on top of that, they also gave him dodge on his passive, meaning that he can cap out, which he would previously need a uniform to get those dodge stats to get that max value. In addition to this, the character also has the much coveted iframe ignore stat on his 3rd skill, as well as a counter, 35% heal, 60% penetration to all sources, and damage accumulation. On his 4th skill, he has a 10 hit barrier as well as a damage buff, and on his 5th skill, he has 5 seconds of invincible and a huge 120% damage proc for that skill. On top of this, every single skill that Spot has is a partial iframe, with the 5th skill being a full iframe. This means that the opponent will likely have to have an iframe ignore skill in their kit to be able to hit him, otherwise he can just dip in those iframes and avoid taking damage. His skill priority is also fairly good, though the 3rd skill does have a pretty decent wind-up time before the damage actually hits. His base health is also really good for a speed type, and because he has that high heal on the 3rd skill with a low cooldown, which he can spam, a CTP of regen is definitely a viable option and is the one that I initially tested. Besides that, one of the other options that you can use is a CTP of authority with the steal effect, and that's actually what I ended up switching into, because the character would get super guard broken oftentimes when I faced him versus meta characters that have a lot of super guard break. So if you want to use the character more of a chance to take out those meta characters, then I would probably recommend a Steal Authority over Regen. But for most other characters and just in general, I would probably recommend a Regen. One of the other reasons I swapped to the Authority is because he doesn't tend to use the 5th skill often in his AI rotation. He usually opens with the 3rd skill and then the 4th skill, and just kind of repeats that, so he doesn't really have a chance to get the invincible and is pretty vulnerable if he gets caught in those iframes or out of the iframes. Other than that, another option that you can end up exploring that could work well for the character is a CTP of Greed, since he does have penetration built into his kit natively, and because the Greed also gives him some ignore dodge, which actually stacks up pretty well with the ignore dodge that he also has in his kit. It could make him pretty much one-tap the opponent, because as you can see in these clips, even with that CTP of regen, the character's damage is really great, and he's surprisingly able to take out top metas like Jean and Thanos, or at least one life of them. In Alliance Conquest, I mostly tested Spot in a solo team by himself, where he is the main damage dealer. Mostly just used a debuff leadership and a support to see what he could do. And although he wasn't as consistent as I thought he would be, he was still able to take out the lives of some meta characters and at the very least wipe the teams. I would definitely say that the character is still above average and definitely a good addition for your roster in Alliance Conquest. Besides these somewhat easier Mephisto and Dormammu teams now, I also took him up against a Doom, Wong, and Magic team, and although he wasn't able to win that set, the first one that I tested, he was able to take out Magic even though she had the Immortal artifact, and then funny enough in the second test that I took him in that had the same team, he was able to do the reverse, take out Wong and Doom, but ended up dying to Magic. If you watched my previous video, you would see that I wasn't really too happy about how they upgraded Spider-Man 2099, since I was expecting him to have more PvP value, considering that that would be more of his lasting impact in the game, whereas for PvE he's basically just going to be forgotten unless he gets a level 80 upgrade or something, which I don't really see happening. But as I mentioned earlier, Spot is one character that I think they did a really great job on. Like I mentioned before, the character is free. He has viability in both PvE and PvP for specific niches and certain modes. And the character functions really well even without a uniform because they gave him a ton of modern stats and skills that allows him to excel just with the Awakening skill and the Transcendence. Although I'm usually interested when the game adds new characters, I don't really expect much from them because other characters that have uniforms and now level 80 upgrades and T4s usually kind of outpace them, so they don't really do much in the long term. But if they make more characters that release on the same level as Spot did, where they can be used in either PvE or PvP depending on how you build them, and that they have a lot of good stats and skills that they can function without needing a uniform per se, then I'd be pretty excited to see the next characters that get released in the game. Because I'm trying something new with my content schedule, I'm not really going to be making a video for Spider-Woman or for Miles. I actually don't plan on getting Miles's latest uniform because I have a bunch of uniform tickets that I can end up using to get his uniform for free, and because I don't really plan on using the character in PvE content. I'm not really going to take him to T4, so I don't really see the point of getting his latest uniform, and the difference won't really be that noticeable in PvP, so that's why I kind of left that off. Instead, I'll probably just end up doing a stream, likely tomorrow, where I'll just show off how Miles and Spider-Woman do in PvE. Miles with his old uniform at level 80, just to see how he hangs there. And maybe I'll even show some PvP content for those characters as well. But for the most part, I think I'll be covering the Kang World Boss Legend stage and kind of breaking that down in the live stream. So basically it's just going to be a medley of those three things just to show those and probably answer some questions and test other things if people come by the stream and want to see some things in particular. Anyways, that does it for this one. If you enjoyed the video, please consider liking and subscribing if you haven't already, and possibly sharing it with others. If you have a question, leave it in the comments section down below and I'll do my best to answer it. As always, I appreciate people taking the time to watch these videos, so thank you, but the video is now over.